want to welcome you to tonight's public meeting presented by Ohio EPA and the Akron Regional Air Quality Management District. My name is Mike Settles. I'm a Public Involvement Coordinator with Ohio EPA's Public Interest Center in Columbus. While I'm based in Columbus, I work with citizens in the northeast 15 counties of Ohio, typically, including Medina County. So even after tonight, if there are environmental issues that you have a question about, see me after the meeting. I'll give you my card. Call me at any point. At the outset, before we get too deep into the weeds, I do want to thank Cloverleaf School Superintendent Derek Billis and his staff for going above and beyond to help make tonight's meeting possible. Being that schools were closed today, I especially appreciate their willingness to allow us to proceed. For those of you with kids in the Cloverleaf District, you're in good hands here. Again, I appreciate the superintendent and his staff. Everybody get a chance, I assume, to go to the registration table and pick up materials. Besides the sign-in sheet, there are copies of the meeting agenda, meeting guidelines, a copy of this evening's PowerPoint. There are blue public hearing cards. A lot of you have handed me those cards. If you want to testify during the second portion of our meeting tonight, fill out one of those blue cards and get it to one of us. There's also a fact sheet there, which is an important fact sheet from our perspective. We recognize that there are a lot of concerns in this community with the pipeline that's going in. Ohio EPA's role, and you probably have already seen the fact sheet, is fairly limited in terms of what we're talking about tonight. It's about a compressor station and the air emissions that come from that station. So that's what we're going to be answering. Unfortunately, there are issues here that are outside our authority. So the fact sheet does detail those agencies that have authority for other types of issues. So please take a look at that fact sheet. Later this evening, we will want to hear your comments about the draft permit and the potential air emissions. So please, again, fill out one of those blue cards and get it to us, and we'll be all set to go. Now, tonight's meeting, there are two portions to it. The first portion is called an information session. The second portion, a public hearing. During the information session, we'll give a brief PowerPoint presentation. It should take about 10 to 15 minutes. I would ask you to hold all your questions until the PowerPoint is complete. I will then come out into the audience with a microphone and come to you to ask your question. This first portion, the information session, is only going to go probably until 7 o'clock total. Because for us, for our agencies, the important part of tonight is the public hearing, which is the second portion. That's when we go on the record with our court reporter and we capture your comments for the official record. Again, if you want to testify, fill out that blue card. I would like to get a show of hands as to how many people intend to testify at the hearing. Can we do just a real quick? Okay. And the reason I'm asking, I was trying to figure out whether we go 3 or 5 minutes for comments. Based on the hands that I saw and the cards that I've received so far, I think we'll be good for 5 minutes per person. We want to get out of here by 10 o'clock. We've got school tomorrow and custodial staff and everyone else that needs to get home. So we have set up 2 court reporters tonight. You've got one here, but if we can't get to you, and I'll be calling the cards in the order in which I receive them. If you don't hear your name and you need to get home to the kids or just call it a night, we will have a second space behind the stage here where you can put your comments on the record. There'll be a second court reporter, and my colleague Darla Peel will act as the hearing officer for that space. So again, it's just down the hall to the left. Just wait for the signs. So it looks like we will limit oral testimony to 5 minutes once we get to the hearing. If you cannot complete your comments in that time, I'll ask you to promptly wrap it up. Keep in mind that all comments presented orally tonight and all comments submitted in writing through February 22nd are given the same consideration. They all become part of one public record. And we look at all of it and we consider all of it. So again, if you have to leave, go to the second court reporter tonight. Getting all that information out of the way, let me introduce tonight's panel. In the middle, we've got Kelly Canoza. Kelly is the permit reviewer, and she is with the Akron Regional Air Quality Management District, and Kelly will be doing the PowerPoint in just a moment. Oh, by the way, Kelly also happens to be an alum of the Cloverleaf local schools, so don't boo her too much. To Kelly's left is Sam Rubens, the administrator for Akron Regional Air Quality Management District, and I'm going to have Sam get up here in just a moment to talk a little bit about what the local air agency is all about. And finally, Mike Hopkins, Assistant Chief of Permitting with Ohio EPA's Division of Air Pollution Control. By the way, we will do our best to answer your questions during the information session portion, but if we don't answer to your satisfaction or we aren't unable to get to your question, please present it during the public hearing portion of the night. Okay, I think we've got most of the details out of the way. We do have other staffers in the audience if need be. We will call on them to assist us, but we should be in pretty good shape. So having said that, Mr. Rubens, the mic is yours.
Thanks, Mike. Again, my name is Sam Rubens. I'm the administrator of the local air agency here in Summit County, or Medina County as well. Thanks for coming out tonight for this educational presentation and public comment session. My name is Sam Rubens. I'm the administrator of the Akron Regional Air Quality Management District, or RACMD, and I'd like to take a moment of time to explain why Ms. Canoza and I are here. RACMD is a service of Summit County Public Health, and we're the local air agency that's contracted with Ohio EPA for all air quality work in Summit, Medina, and Portage counties. We've been around doing air quality work for over 50 years in the Akron area and over 45 years here in Medina County. I'd like to thank Health Commissioner Chris Wasowski and Environmental Health Director Colin Johnson of the Medina County Health Department for their support in getting this meeting here in Medina County, and also the Superintendent of Cloverleaf Schools for allowing me to use the space for tonight's meeting. Now, this is quick. I'd like to introduce the permitting engineer who's working on the NEXUS pipeline compressor station permit, Kelly Canoza. Please give her your attention. We look forward to hearing your concerns and working with you. Thanks.
Hello everyone. As Sam mentioned, my name is Kelly Canoza and I'm an air quality engineer at the Akron Regional Air Quality Management District. I am one of the permit writers from Medina County, and tonight I'm going to give a brief overview of the air permitting process and describe what Ohio EPA will regulate for the proposed Wadsworth compressor station. As the guys mentioned, following the presentation there will be a question and answer session, and after that is the main event, which is recording your comments on the public record. Starting with a little background on the permitting process, Ohio EPA requires the permit to install and operate to be obtained before an air pollution source can be constructed in Ohio. The permit application for the Wadsworth compressor station was received in July of last year, and public notice was published in the Medina Gazette. Public notices are also available on the Ohio EPA website under the weekly review publication. Our agency reviews the application and writes the permit terms to ensure compliance with applicable state and federal air quality requirements. The permit is issued using the same notification steps as with the application. Not every permit will go through a draft issuance cycle. It was used in this case because of the large amount of public interest. And Ohio EPA will review and respond to comments received during the draft permit comment period, which will end for this permit on next Monday, February 22nd. The time it takes for us to respond to comments will depend on the amount of comments received. And the director reviews the response to comments and makes a final permitting decision, which is either denying the permit or issuing the final permit. The focus of tonight's meeting is on air emissions because that's what we have the authority to regulate. US EPA has created federal, national ambient air quality standards to protect public health and the environment, and the air permit is how we enforce those standards. There are other aspects concerning compressor stations which also generate a lot of public interest but fall outside of our authority. The compressor station fact sheet that you have on the second page, there is a table that contains the names of the other government entities who regulate the areas shown here, and we do encourage you to contact them directly with any questions or comments you may have. Getting into some details on the proposed project, NEXUS Gas Transmission plans to install a natural gas compressor station in Guilford Township in order to repressurize gas to keep it moving through a proposed interstate pipeline. The Wadsworth compressor station would be powered by a natural gas-fired combustion turbine, which would be the largest single source of air emissions at this facility. Here is a proposed map of the site. The compressor station would be located off Guilford Road, and just north of I-76. This purple box is an approximate property boundary, about 75 total acres to give you an idea of the scale. The actual building which would house the combustion turbine is just a portion of this property, not the whole. This is a process flow diagram of a typical compressor station. It's also the same diagram you have on the front page of the handout. It is not the exact layout of the proposed Wadsworth compressor station, but it will give you an idea of the type of equipment that would be located on the site. If we follow the flow of gas from the pipeline, it will start going through some filter separator units to remove any solid particulates or liquid condensate from the gas stream. Some of the gas will be routed to fuel the actual combustion turbine here. The rest of the gas will pass through the compressor unit where it's repressurized to keep the flow rate moving through the pipeline. When gas is under pressure and compressed, the temperature will increase, so the gas cooling system will lower the temperature before it returns to the pipeline. Other sources on site would be a backup electrical generator in case of electrical outages, oil systems to lubricate the combustion turbine and keep the parts moving smoothly, mufflers to reduce noise, and some other sources specific to Wadsworth that weren't in this picture. Pipeline pigging activities that have launching and receiving vessels to periodically clean out the pipeline, liquid storage tanks that would hold used lubricating oil or pipeline condensate that's removed by the filter separator scrubbers, roadways, loading operations for tanker trucks that would come in to empty the storage tanks, and small process heaters, parts washers. Those smaller sources here on the right side of the table were not included in the draft permit because they have such a small potential to emit they meet permit exemptions. These emission unit ID numbers in parentheses are how Ohio EPA identifies a facility's equipment or activities that would emit air pollutants for permitting purposes. The draft permit establishes allowable emission limits specific to each individual source. This table is a facility-wide summary of the maximum worst-case annual potential to emit. Actual emissions from the compressor station would typically be much lower than this. The nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxide, particulate matter, and sulfur dioxide are solely attributed to products from natural gas combustion in the compressor turbine. A portion of the volatile organic compounds would also be generated from natural gas combustion, but the majority of that would be from various gas releases associated with operating and maintaining a compressor station, like equipment startup and shutdowns. To put this amount of annual emissions in perspective, the VOC emissions are similar to what would be emitted from a very large gas station, and the amount of other pollutants would be similar to what would be emitted from a boiler used to heat an office building. In addition to the permit emission limits, the draft permit will have control measures such as the use of an oxidation catalyst for the turbine to reduce carbon monoxide and volatile organic compound emissions. The turbine is also equipped with low NOx burners to reduce NOx emissions. The permit has operational restrictions, monitoring, record keeping, and reporting requirements for tracking compliance. There are specific terms to establish a leak detection and repair program, which require the permittee to monitor for leaks using an EPA-approved analyzer and report the results back to us. The permit requires emissions testing for nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxides, and VOC emissions from the combustion turbine within 180 days of startup. Testing for the largest pollutant, the nitrogen oxide emissions, will be ongoing annually or biannually depending on how close the test results are to the permit allowable emission limits. So what happens next? Public comments can be submitted to our agency through next Monday, February 22nd. The director will consider comments received and make a final permitting decision, which could be approving the permit as it is, proposing a denial, or issuing a modified permit. The response to comments is made available to anyone on the interested parties list. If you submitted comments already by email or US mail, your name is already on the list, and you can also get on the interested parties list by signing up at the registration table. Final actions of the director may be appealed to the Environmental Review Appeals Commission, or ERAC. This board is separate from Ohio EPA and reviews cases in accordance with Ohio's environmental laws and rules. Once again, comments may be submitted by testifying on the record this evening or sending them to me by email or US mail at the address here. And a reminder, by next Monday, February 22nd, I can't say that enough. And lastly, for questions after tonight, you can contact Mr. Mike Settles, our meeting moderator, at Ohio EPA's Public Interest Center by phone or email. Thank you for your time and attention, and I'll hand the mic back to Mike.
Thanks, Kelly. Whoa. Turn it down a little bit. Questions? Oh yeah, if you guys have written comments you want to submit and you don't want to put comments on the record orally, just hand it to one of us and we'll put it right here. Yes, ma'am.
On the impacts that she had on there, I didn't notice anything about heat. Is this going to generate any kind of heat from this machinery that you have there? And if so, what does that do with the quality of the moisture that you might be putting together when heat meets cold? That will produce a steam. Is there any kind of impact regarding the moisture that will be produced by this particular facility?
Mike, can you?
All right, see if I can get this right. The question has to do with, is the facility going to produce heat, and will it produce some moisture?
Hey, Mike, why don't you come out a little ways away? I think we're getting the speaker feedback. That worked too.
Maybe I'll use this one.
Okay.
So the question is whether or not there's going to be moisture and heat produced by this facility. And the answer is yes, there is going to be heat produced by the facility. As Kelly pointed out, one of the processes is to cool down the heated natural gas after it's compressed, because the actual function of compressing gas causes it to get hot. And so before they put it back in the pipeline, they have to cool it, and that cooling results in heat going into the atmosphere. There may also be some moisture associated with it. There's probably not a lot of moisture except maybe from the combustion of the natural gas. But overall, the heat and the moisture that we would expect from this really won't be very significant. It's not like you would feel any heat from this facility if you were standing next to it.
The question was, one would cause fog or smog.
And I don't believe that it would cause significant quantities of fog or smog. Now, I guess I'll define what I mean by those two terms. Fog is generally created when you are cooling down some air that has water vapor in it, and when that happens, it creates tiny particles of water, which is essentially fog or clouds. So anytime you do that, you can create some fog. But from this particular facility, I wouldn't expect normally to see any kind of fog in the area from its operations. You might see some plumes of heat and gas coming from the stack of the source, simply because it's combusting a fuel, a lot like your car does. So you do sometimes see plumes of gases coming from your vehicle. So in the same manner, you can see that from the stacks of the facility.
Okay, we've got a question over here. If we get time, ma'am, we'll come back to you.
Okay. The air quality emissions that you put up are following federal guidelines. The state of Pennsylvania last year has tightened all their air compressor guidelines because they followed the initial guidelines too, and they found they weren't sufficient. Are you considering to tighten up your guidelines? And secondarily, do you have the ability to force these people to make a closed compressor system rather than just let all the gas emissions go into the air during their startups and shutdowns?
All right, so there are a couple of questions. The first is, what about the standards that we're using to restrict this particular facility? And this facility is limited based upon a number of different standards. We have several different pollutants that are being emitted, and each of those pollutants, we have rules that restrict the operations of those particular, the amount of emissions that can come from those. So our standards, in some ways, are more stringent for this kind of facility than Pennsylvania's standards. In some ways are equal to Pennsylvania's, and in some ways are slightly less than Pennsylvania's. But our particular, in terms of the way that we set things up, is we make sure that our standards meet the US EPA National Ambient Air Quality Standards. Those are standards that US EPA has set to protect public health and welfare. And our goal is to make sure that when any source is put in, any new source is put in, that even if they operate at their maximum rate, the amount of emissions will not cause any kind of exceedance of the standards that US EPA sets to protect public health and welfare. So we believe that at these levels, that it would be protective of public health and welfare.
We've got a few questions, and then I'll get back to you.
Second question about the system tighter, making it a closed loop system. Do you have the ability to force that as part of your EPA guideline?
Yeah, one of the questions has to do with some of the venting that can occur with some of these facilities. We had a picture of the compressor stations, of the compressor units. Excuse me. And the compressor units, periodically, when they have to do maintenance on them, they have to release some of the gas that's in that unit on a temporary basis so that they can actually open it up safely and start working on it. And during those times, there's going to be some venting of the gas straight to the atmosphere. Depending upon the type of process or the type of equipment that we're talking about, that can result in direct emissions of natural gas. One of the things that you're asking about is there a way to control those more closely? And there are some techniques that in some instances can be used. In other cases, it's not capable or they're not an easy way to do that. But I think that's one of the areas that we're asking you guys to provide comments on. If you feel that the venting that we've discussed in the permit is something that shouldn't occur, then we want your comments, and we want to know what states like Pennsylvania or other facilities, other states implement to restrict those emissions. And those are things we'll certainly consider as we move forward to make a decision on the permit.
Thank you, Mike.
What is considered an interested party here? What qualifies for that?
Talking about as it relates to this meeting, anybody is virtually an interested party.
Correct.
You're an interested party. Yeah.
What's the experience level on this project? Regarding safety, success ratio, satisfied people throughout the system, the safety record on this system?
I guess the way I'd answer that is that Ohio EPA and the permit that we have right now has to do with evaluating the air pollution emissions that would come from this facility if it were built. Ohio EPA and the air program does not evaluate safety. That's with other organizations. So we're not experts in safety, and so it really wouldn't be appropriate for me to try to give you some kind of answer concerning safety in terms of the operation of that particular piece of equipment. So our comments tonight will have to do with what we're here for, and that is the air pollution that comes from this facility and how it operates and that kind of information. So I can't really answer the issue on the history of safety of this kind of facility.
Thanks, Mike. And now back at the other side. I will try to work my way around the room. Bear with us. I see several of you holding your hands up.
Hi, some of these chemicals, these emissions look pretty toxic. And if emitted during rain or snow, will that get into the groundwater? And number two, you say this unit produces heat. Well, what would prevent it from exploding? Number three, what kind of security measures are wrapped around these facilities to prevent them from, say, becoming a terrorist target?
Yeah, and I guess I'll start with the last two, the security and I guess the heat and explosion. For security, Ohio EPA is not involved in the security. That's completely different organizations that do that. So for Ohio EPA and our air program to answer questions on security, we're not really involved in that. So those questions really need to go to other organizations, and we can help you figure out who that would be. I think the other one was whether or not the equipment, if it gets hot, would you cause some kind of explosion. That again is not something that Ohio EPA evaluates. That's something that there are other organizations within the state of Ohio and within the federal government that would evaluate the engineering design of the equipment to make sure that it is operated safely and that it can operate correctly.
And Mike, I think he was, maybe you answered it, I missed it. He was asking about rain or snow and could the chemicals fall out and into groundwater?
Right, I think that was the first one, and I'm glad you stood up because I had forgotten it by the time I got to it. So, but that's an important issue, and certainly when we permit any kind of air pollution source, it's going to produce air pollution. That's why we're here. We have listed amounts of pollution that this company can emit, and the question is what's going to happen to that pollution, and whether or not it's going to cause some kind of adverse impact. The amount of pollution that we evaluate is whether or not the amount of pollution that gets downwind of this facility outside their fence line will have any kind of adverse health or welfare impacts to anyone near the facility. And we've evaluated it. We need you to look at these and see if we got it right. But we've evaluated it, and what we've seen so far is we think we're in good shape. We think there won't be any adverse health or welfare effects associated with that. And in addition to that, we would not expect the amount of emissions that come off of this to be significant enough that if in a rain event or a snow event, that it would cause any kind of measurable impact on the surface water or any kind of water quality issues. So we wouldn't expect that from the amount of air emissions that we're talking about.
Next question.
Hi, I've enjoyed 3 cancers, so I tend to be a little aware of this. And I think about people in Bhopal and people in Chernobyl. I know I'm not saying this is not a nuclear facility or a chemical plant. But how many children, senior citizens or assisted living, people's homes are within a 5 to 10 mile radius? What plans have been made to evacuate those people? And worst case scenarios, you're showing me best case caps. You're not telling me worst case scenarios, what's going to happen to people in this community, to their property, to their livelihood, and to their children, unborn and born.
That's a very important issue, and you guys are here because you're concerned about what's going on in your community, and you have children, you have elderly, you have all kinds of people.
Can you just answer the question?
And the issue has to do with whether or not the amount of pollution is likely to cause any kind of adverse health effects. What we do is we look at the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, and we have to make sure that any pollution that comes from this facility meets those standards. Now, where do those standards come from? They come from US EPA, and where does US EPA get those from? They have a scientific advisory committee that looks at all the studies that are out there concerning those various pollutants. And they try to just figure out, well, at what level does that particular pollutant likely to cause adverse health and welfare effects, including things like cancers or including things like other kinds of health effects. And when those scientific advisors make a recommendation to US EPA, US EPA uses that information to set those standards, and then when we issue a permit, we make sure that the facility will meet those standards. So from an air pollution standpoint, running the equipment at its maximum rate, our information says that we'll be able to meet those national ambient air quality standards, and therefore from the air pollution from this kind of source, you're not going to have adverse health and welfare effects.
That is not a worst case scenario.
Yeah,
Worst case
you're right.
scenario, you have this building that's within 5 miles of the site. You have senior citizens who would need ambulances to get out of their housing.
Yeah, I think the other part of your question is if there are accidents or some kind of problem at the facility, how is that dealt with? And that's an important issue too. What we're talking about tonight is the air permit for when it has normal operation. Our particular group does not evaluate accidental issues, and how do you go about dealing with when there's an accident. And those are very valid questions. We're just not the right ones to answer that question because we don't get involved in that. It's other organizations that get involved in that. And those are really, really important questions.
Okay. Yeah, again, I know a lot of you have already been in communication with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, right? And a lot of these issues are really best geared toward FERC. And I know you've already expressed them, and you're going to be expressing them in upcoming meetings. Got a question?
Yes, I had a question concerning permit limits and that sort of thing. When a compressor station exceeds permit limits, what is Ohio EPA's response?
Yeah, so there are kind of two different scenarios. One scenario is when something occurs at the plant where they have a malfunction that is going to cause significant excess emissions that could cause adverse health effects or welfare effects. And that's, in that case, the Ohio EPA, along with many other government organizations, do an immediate response. That's where you see our emergency response people go out. That's where you have the experts who go and evaluate what's going on. That's where you have the local emergency folks deal with whatever's going on to make sure that people are safe. So that's something that happens, as you guys have certainly seen in other cases where we have some kind of accident or something. In terms of normal, everyday operating the equipment and that kind of stuff, if they have a malfunction that has excess emissions, they're required to report that to us immediately. If they have just some kind of requirement, that's just, I mean, I'm just telling you what the law is. Now, will they do that or not? I don't know the answer to that. But if there's some kind of normal exceedance of their permit, some other kind of exceedance of their permit, they may have to report that on another basis, where it isn't something that had some breakdown or something that caused excess emissions. And then if they fail to comply with their permit, depending on the nature of it, then we can pursue enforcement against them. And that can range anything, depending on the nature of the issue, that can range anything from a simple warning letter all the way up to enforcement penalties, shutdown orders, things like that if it becomes necessary. So there's kind of a wide range of things that we do in the case where they have some kind of violation of their permit.
And again, that's where we rely on our local partners, the Akron Regional Air Quality Management District, and on the public, frankly. If there's an odor that you smell that doesn't seem right, or if you're aware, I'm just saying, if this thing is approved and it's built, you're going to want to know who to call if you think there's an issue going on. And in this case, in your area, that would be Akron Regional. Or me. Yes, sir.
Is this going to be monitored by you guys through the course of the year? Is there any testing going on that they won't know about through the course of the year so you can maintain levels?
Yeah, there's actually a number of different ways that we try to monitor facilities. And there's a wide range of things that we do. It can range anywhere from requiring them to do testing of the emissions like we've discussed here. When they first put this source in, and we require them to actually sample emissions from the stack of the largest source that we're talking about here. So in that particular case, there is an initial testing that has to happen where they actually have to hire a company who's expert on doing those kinds of testing. And then we come out during the testing to make sure they're doing the testing correctly. And then when they submit the report, we evaluate the report to make sure that it was done all correctly, following US EPA methods on testing. So that's one thing that we do in terms of testing. And we typically do that for some of the larger sources, the medium-sized or smaller sources. We may have other things that we do in terms of requiring them to keep records of the equipment and the operation of those particular sources. We'll evaluate, they have monitoring and record keeping that they have to keep, and then they have to submit certain reports to us, which we evaluate to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. In addition, we can go out and do facility inspections. We'll typically do an inspection when a facility is first built to make sure it was built like they said it was going to be built. And then we'll also do periodic inspections, and I think like Mike mentioned earlier, if we get a citizen who has a concern with an odor or something that's going on with a facility, we'll go out and inspect it to figure out what's going on, and then make sure that it's operated safely and that we've got things, that they're doing things the way they're supposed to be doing.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I live in Michigan. I own property in Ohio near a proposed compressor station in Fulton County. The EPA tried to put had an open hearing like this in Guilford Township about 2 months ago for an injection well. The EPA says they don't inspect, they let the industry inspect their own facilities. So you're saying the compressor station is going to be inspected by NEXUS, And so if a resident or if NEXUS turns in a report that there's a problem, you'll come out and look at it. I live in Michigan. We're sensitive to this Flint water issue. The EPA dropped the ball on the water issue in Flint, Michigan. There's not much trust in the EPA now across the country. You got problems in Sebring. You got problems in Parkersville with the DuPont Teflon issue. They dropped the ball there. The aquifer is polluted. We want to know what's being done with the EPA to change this.
Let me clarify. When you say EPA, you're talking US EPA or Michigan Department of Environmental Quality?
That's the DEQ and the EPA. The EPA held a hearing.
People intermix us with the US EPA all the time also.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I missed part of it because of the microphone came in, but I guess the one question or issue you were asking is, what about EPA? And what about our credibility? And that's a really good question, because obviously there are some people who dropped the ball. And that's something that we take very seriously. We've got a lot of people who are very interested in making sure that everything we do is correct. And do we have people who make mistakes? Yeah, we do. But that's not the folks that we've got here. We know, we live in the community. We know that that's important to the community. And we try to do everything we can to make sure people are in compliance with permits and make sure people their health is protected.
A couple more from this side, and then I'll work my way over. Yes.
In the same vein, we live within a half mile of where this is going to be. How is the EPA going to protect our water supply in that? Are you going to test the water before they get going and then do periodic checks after they are going? I mean, we don't have an option of having city water or anything else. We have a well. So how is the EPA going to protect us in that regard?
That's a really good question, and that's a water issue. And it's one of those that is important. But the trouble is, we've got an air permit, which is what we're talking about tonight. We have other people who can talk to you about water issues and how the water supply is protected. And I'd really rather have them answer the questions on water, because I'm not an expert on the water side.
Yes, sir. And by the way, ma'am, when you get to the hearing part, if you want to ask that again, we'll dissect everything that comes in and we'll get that response to that.
Yeah, Mike, some of my questions have already been answered, and they just cause more confusion in my mind. But my questions were about who verifies this, who goes back out and checks, who does it in the midterm, the short term, and especially the long term, 3 years, 5 years. Are we going to depend on self-reporting? It kind of reminds me of the box watch in the hen house. I don't know. I just don't have a lot of confidence in self-reporting. In the industry I grew up in, the folks that set the standards, they would do unannounced visits to your plant, unannounced, to check to make sure you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. Something as serious as this, for health detriment and property values and other things that are involved, I'm just shocked that we don't have something already set up in the system to do that, to help ease the mind of all of us out here who are going to be impacted by it. That's it.
Yeah, that's a good question. The question really has to do with, well, are we relying on self-reporting? And the answer is, depending on how significant the emissions are, we either yes, rely on self-reporting, or no, we require additional requirements in terms of ongoing monitoring, record-keeping, reporting, emissions testing. We certainly can go out and do unannounced inspections. We've done that before. We'll do that in the future when we need to do that. The way we've got things set up is when we write these permits, the higher the emissions are, the more rigorous the ongoing requirements are. And in some cases, we may have an actual monitor that measures the emissions that come out of the stack. In some other cases, we may have periodic stack testing where they have to go in and measure their emissions to make sure the equipment is operating correctly. All the way down to where they have to keep records and they have to monitor those and send us reports and we evaluate those. We can't require, or we don't have the equipment, or the equipment doesn't exist to have continuous monitoring on every single source that's out there. There are tens of thousands of sources out there. So what we have to try to do is manage that work in terms of making sure that where there's higher emissions, we're going to have more rigorous evaluation of what's going on at that particular source. So it all depends on how much emissions are expected, whether we go a route of self-collecting information and providing that to us, all the way up to continuous monitoring of a particular source.
Thanks, Mike. Next question.
Hi, I'm an interested party as well. I'm a neighbor immediately to the east of this proposed site. And I really, I'm objecting to the idea of the release into the air periodically of the natural gas, because I see your standards are an average of a yearly permissible limit. But what happens when I'm running around the perimeter of my farm, as I do daily, or riding my horses around the perimeter of the farm, and they'd have one of these eruptions, and I have
the blowdown event?
Yes, and then I happen to be inhaling whatever it is. Is there some way you can modify that? And then I guess the other thing I was wondering is, have you ever denied a permit, and what would it take? What kind of things are you looking for from us to say to you as a community that we're really not interested in this?
I guess I'll answer the second part first, and that is the issue of whether or not we can just decide that we shouldn't issue an air permit for this. And our answer and our requirement is that if we look at the application materials and we look at what's going to be emitted and we look at the rules and we evaluate those and everything tells us that it's going to meet all of the rules and therefore be protective of public health, we have to issue the air permit. We can't not issue it just because we don't like where it's located. That's not something we have the authority to do. And so that is, of course, hard to hear, but I want to be honest in terms of what our part is in terms of what we can and can't do. So that's the second part of your question. And I've already forgotten. You guys have
Well, but also, Mike, I think she was asking us what comments are helpful in your further review of this permit.
Right. The comments that are helpful, and it is really difficult to do that because our rules are, by their nature, very complex. And it's hard as a citizen to understand what exactly we're doing with a permit like this and what kind of comments would be helpful to that. Most of the comments that are helpful to us are comments that discuss the applicability of various rules, the amount of emissions, whether the amount of emissions is going to cause any kind of adverse health effects or welfare effects. Those kinds of detailed comments are things that can affect what we do in terms of setting up the permit or working on the permit or even approving the permit. So that is certainly the kinds of comments that help us the most to do our work. I think you would also ask the question of whether or not we have ever denied a permit. And the Ohio EPA has denied permits in the past. It is not something that happens very frequently because in most cases the companies know what the rules are, what they have to meet, and they come to us with a permit application that has all the things met. And so we are under an obligation to issue that particular permit. So it's very, very rare that would happen from an air standpoint.
Well, and also, Mike, I have met with Kathy Jones from Sustainable Medina County. We've got Corn here tonight. There are groups that have organized locally that seem to have the wherewithal to get the proper people pulled together so that they can provide those technical comments on things that I don't understand, but they do. So we will be looking for those tonight in addition to your comments. Now, we've got about 6 minutes left. I will not be getting around for a second question to anybody, but I'll see what I can get in the next 5 or 6 minutes. Yes.
So as a healthcare professional, I'm a nurse, and you know, carbon monoxide, we all have carbon monoxide detectors in our house. And we all lived here before this NEXUS people, so as citizens, what is our right that we don't want any more pollution in our air, and that why should they be able to come in and put a drop, like an ounce of pollution in our air that we have to breathe? We chose to live here in Medina County because we like it here, and if I wanted to live next to a factory, I could go in downtown Cleveland and live next to the steel mill. I didn't choose to do that. So this company is taking my rights away as a citizen, and we want to know what So why do they have the right to say, I want to buy this man's property and put something that's going to pollute my air that I breathe? And I have a carbon monoxide detector in my house for my furnace so that it doesn't kill me. And then they're trying to say that this is going to be safe for people that have respiratory issues and people that have problems, children, that this is going to be okay, that this is an allowable amount, when I have to watch my furnace so that I don't kill my family.
Okay. Thank you.
So we need to know,
Thank
what
you.
do we need to do? What do we need to do to stop this company from building this here? And if the permit says they can use tonnage and dump tons of toxins on us, as citizens, what do we do to say, no, we don't want to allow this in our
Give us the truth.
All right. Please let me answer the question.
Yeah, I think I don't know if I have an answer that will magically say, if you do this, that'll stop the project. I don't have that kind of answer. I think the things that you guys are doing in terms of organizing and getting groups together and participating in that effort are all important things to help with that kind of effort. The issue of emitting additional air pollutants, that's a good question, and the issue is, well, how should we deal with that from an air pollution standpoint? Should we just stop all sources from emitting any new air pollution? If we do that, we don't have any new businesses. But the way the air pollution program is set up, the way the air pollution program is set up is Ohio EPA monitors the air all throughout Ohio. We have the third or fourth largest monitoring network of any state. And we evaluate the air pollution, and we are constantly working to put additional regulations in, additional requirements in, to reduce air pollution where it needs to be reduced. That's part of our overall goals, and that's what part of our effort is. Now, what that means is we can allow some new sources to go in, but that also means other sources end up having to reduce emissions so that we have the ability to let new factories come in and those kinds of things. So it's kind of a balance with the goal of always trying to work your way towards meeting the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. And that's just something that we try to balance that, and we evaluate that to make sure that we are if we aren't meeting the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, that we're reducing emissions from all kinds of places, including cars, including small mom and pop shops, including industry, to get our areas into attainment.
Okay, ma'am, in fairness to people, you've already asked your question.
I have to get my car tested because the
Ma'am?
air quality is already poor.
Ma'am, you'll have an opportunity to testify at the hearing. Next question.
Mike, I have like two questions. One is about when they release the gas when they're doing cleaning. Is there any kind of regulation for how often they do that, or how much gas is released when they do that? And is that monitored? And then my other question deals with the Muskingum watershed, which is close to where this proposed facility is. Does the EPA take into consideration that water source and where it goes, even though I know it's water's taken care of by another agency? If there's pollution from the gas release that comes into that water, is that anything that the air EPA gets involved in?
Okay, the first question had to do with the frequency of the venting when they have to vent various pieces of equipment. And that is defined, we have restricted them in the permit in terms of the number of times that they can do that for various pieces of equipment. So there is a restriction in there, and that is defined in that particular permit. So it's one of the things that we put in the permit to try to minimize those. And then the second question is, well, what about water quality? And the water quality from the air emissions that are going out, we would not expect that to be significant enough to even have any kind of impact on the water quality. So it's not big enough to cause that. Now there are other things in terms of which I'm not involved in, and that is in terms of when they put the pipeline in and what they have to do to protect the groundwater when they do that. And we have folks at Ohio EPA who deal with that, and we'll be working on that particular issue at a later time. So yeah, that's an important issue, and that's something that is something that we will be looking at from an agency standpoint, but not from the air permit standpoint.
Okay, we're going to take 2 more questions, and I realize there's a dozen hands up, but you'll have to put your questions on the record when we get to the hearing. That's, again, and Kathy, you're going to be the final one, so I'll get to you next.
Yeah, my name is Barry Booth. I drove 2.5 hours up here from Carroll County, where the oil and gas industry is king. I live about 1.5 miles from a compressor station, and one Sunday morning, I'm going to testify on this, it knocked me and my wife inside of our house to our knees. I started puking. My eyes was watering. I couldn't get up. I called 911. The fire departments come out. They smelled it. I called the EPA, and guess what? You guys told me that it was my furnace. It wasn't. It was the compressor station. Finally, I had to call my senator to get him to put enough force on you people to get Chesapeake people to come out and look at that and talk to our neighbors. And guess what? He didn't exist. He passed out cards that nobody knows who he was. He's Chesapeake Environmental Protection Agency. Then the EPA comes out. They are ordered by Senator Jindal. Guess what? You guys don't have monitors to figure out anything. That's all I got to say. Thank you.
Mine's the last question, and it's a quick question. I want to ask each one of you, and you too, Mr. Settles, would you all be feeling comfortable to have a compressor station 500 feet from your home? Would you live there? Would you feel comfortable? You feel protected, and you wouldn't be worried about your family or you getting sick or your neighbors getting poisoned? How about it? Can you answer me, please?
Yeah, my answer is that from what I understand of the impacts and the amount of emission that's going to be emitted, I would not have a concern with living a half mile from this facility.
You want to buy my house?
It's not something I would be concerned with.
You can't say that you know that's what the emissions are going to be. You're just saying you're understanding because that's from the manufacturer's specs. So Spectra uses that to put in their permit, and so you say, okay, it looks okay, so we think it'll be fine. There's no...
Yeah, I mean, certainly right now, we don't have a facility, and when we do these permits, the facilities aren't built yet, because they're permits that allow them to build. So we don't have direct information from a yet unbuilt facility. So what we have to use is information from the manufacturers of the equipment. We have to use information from other existing facilities that have tested. And we use all of that information to decide what the expected emissions are. And then in the case of the largest source, once it's built, we actually require them to test it to make sure that it meets that level. And you're right, initially we have to rely on all kinds of sources of information to estimate the emissions and to get a handle on how much emissions are going to be coming from a particular facility.
Okay, we're going to proceed into the public hearing. Again, some very good questions, and I would ask you to put them on the record. And first I got to read the script into the record, and then we'll start calling people up. I'll call your name, and then I'll